Hello Summoners, welcome back to another ProGuides video. My name is Nathan Ng. I'm here with the 12.7 mid-patch update. We'll provide updated tier lists for all 5 roles and follow up on balance changes from the patch. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future content like this. Now, let's get started. First up, we'll be talking about our top laners. Fiora gets moved up to the OP tier. She's doing just too well to consistently not be moved up to the highest level. If you can just survive lane, she outscales almost anyone in 1v1 duels and can completely take over the game at 2 or 3 items. Her one weakness is that she's relatively kiteable in teamfights, but that's easily circumvented by sitting in a side lane and forcing your opponents to come to you. Another champion that's been creeping up the tier list is Zac, who's also getting pushed up to the highest tier. Unlike most other OP and S tier champions, he's still pretty rare, to the point where he's considered off meta. And that's the good news if you want to abuse him. Since he's so underpicked, most people don't really know how to lane against him. A lot of people expect Zac to not really do much since he's just a big beefy blob, but his damage and extended trades is surprisingly high and he can easily get solo kills on disrespectful opponents. The last champion that we got moving up to the OP tier this patch is Quinn. She's one of Riot's more recent examples that they aren't really exactly in tune with what's going on with the game. She was already performing well when they slapped a random buff on her, and ever since, she's been sitting around a 54% win rate. We're usually pretty hesitant to put a marksman solo laner into the OP tier since they're usually feast or famine and don't provide anything to the team comp. But Quinn is so consistently on the feast side of things that she's super low risk with very high rewards, and she can't not be considered OP. It seems like we slightly overvalued the Wukong buffs that he got. He's doing statistically better, but not enough to be considered the OP tier. So for now, he's going to be dropping down to the S tier. The one thing to bear in mind is that this could also be the result of a lot more people playing and learning the champion. All his first timers may be bringing down his stats quite a bit, so this change is quite tentative, but we'll make sure to err on the side of caution. On the other side of the coin, a champ whose buffs we undervalued is Lilia, who's now getting bumped up to the S tier. We knew Lilia would be absolutely destroying tanks and juggernauts, who she could already beat before, but had at least a bit of doubt that she'd be able to take on bruisers as well. Well, it turns out that she's definitely doing well into champs of all classes, with the exception of just a few specific matchups. Of those matchups, the worst by far is Gangplank. While it's pretty rare to see a good GP outside of the top of the ladder, when you do, he can make a matchup pretty unplayable. So you want to ban him out if you're going to be playing her. Tahm Kench is finally being pushed out of the OP tier, but he's still considered one of the better S tier champions. He's definitely still a strong pick, but not quite as much of a 1v9er as the other champions on the very top of the list. Malphite drops to the A tier, a move that we should have made some time ago. The thing is, our S tier should be champions that are blind pickable to the point where they can still do well in most lanes, and have a big impact on how the game plays out. But Malphite has enough bad lane matchups that he doesn't really make the cut for that. But he also isn't so situational that he belongs in the B tier. Even if you go 0-10 with Malphite in lane, his ultimate will always be useful in 5v5s, so he's definitely a little bit better than just a B tier pick. Yasuo's recent buff has helped him out quite a bit, and we think that he could be considered a situational pick, so he lands in the B tier. You won't have very many instances where you should pick him, but when your opponent does give you one of Yasuo's easy lanes, feel free to give it a go if it fits your comp. Poppy has been doing super well in recent patches, but for some reason, she fell off hard on this one. We're moving her all the way down to the B tier, but this one could be subject to change. While Kennen struggles against just about any bruiser that can reliably gap close, he's an insanely strong pick when you get him against a low threat opponent. In easy matchups, you're free to just farm up and scale to teamfights where he's a complete menace. So he ends up in the B tier. Victor's win rate has massively improved over the past few patches, but that high win rate is a little bit deceptive. He only does really well against certain matchups, while most of his bad ones are some of the most popular meta picks. So while he is only really good in some situations, only being able to be picked up in certain scenarios means that we can only place him as high as a B tier. With nerf after nerf after nerf, Zeri is definitely unplayable as a solo laner now. There's pretty much no good matchups, and she adds nothing to the comp when behind, so she moves down to the D tier. Now for the jungle, here's our list. Now that people have gotten the hang of him, Rengar is looking like an OP tier pick. The extra damage that he punches makes it a lot easier to one-shot squishies, even once they picked up a defensive item. He's also a lot smoother to play overall, which makes a pretty big difference when you're playing a champion that can literally one-shot a target in the blink of an eye. Shyvana moves up to the S tier. You may be wondering how a champion with no changes for the entire season can go from C tier to the S tier, but the answer is pretty simple. It's all about the build. For the past few years, people have been playing Shyvana as an AP nuke, but it's always been pretty mediocre. It may feel satisfying to blast a squishy target for more than half their HP, but there's so much downtime on when you're actually being useful. You run around and you shoot a few fireballs for a few seconds, and then once your ultimate runs out, you're kind of irrelevant. By building this new build, you can turn Shyvana into a tanky AP bruiser that can actually dive in and use her entire dragon form kit to be a massive threat in teamfights. Echo gets knocked down to the A tier. He was doing really well last patch, but it seems like it was more of a fluke than anything, and now his overall performance is just kind of above average. You can still snowball hard with him, and once you reach 2 items, he's definitely a strong assassin, but he doesn't belong anywhere higher than the A tier at the moment. As with Wukong top lane, we overestimated how much the changes would affect Wukong jungle, so we're moving him down to the A tier for now. This is subject to change as more people start to learn him with the new buffs, but for now, we think this is where he belongs. We previously had Talia in the B tier, considering her specific matchup to counter junglers that either had very slow clears or that relied on dashes that she could use against them. But she's been doing very well enough lately across the board in all matchups that we think that she deserves to be bumped up to the A tier. That said, you may not want to just force the pick every game. You don't want to take her with 2 other AP carries on your team or in a game where you don't have much of a frontline. Talia really does best when you can layer her combo onto an ally CC, making for an easy one-shot. Kiana was previously banished to the C tier, but she's been improving a lot lately, so we think she can scrape by as a B tier pick. She's too feast or famine, without having a lot of utility to fall back on to make it any higher than that. The final jungle change that we have for you in this list is Karthus being bumped down to the C tier. Hot take, I was really hoping that the buff to his Q he got this patch would be enough for him to become a meta again, but it changed practically nothing. A bit of a faster clear speed is just too little to make a difference in how much he gets absolutely rolled by every other meta pick in the game. Now, here's our mid lane tier list. While his spot hasn't still changed on the tier list, I still want to quickly mention something about Singed. While it is a relatively small sample size, there is no disputing that having a nearly 60% win rate means that this pick is pretty OP. Take advantage of this pick while he's still in the OP tier, but make sure that you know that he has a very awkward playstyle. Yasuo's buffs this patch has pushed him up quite a bit, to the point where he makes it all the way up to the OP tier. Here it is. Yasuo is one of those champions where you can't just look at his win rate to determine how strong he is. A lot of Yasuo players are prone to tilting, and they play either to get 10-0 and or 0-10. So with that subjectively in mind, we think that when played well, he definitely qualifies as an OP tier pick. Just like we said with her in the jungle, Talia mid also moves from the B to the A tier. She's one of the harder mids to execute, since you need to constantly shove and roam to put pressure on the map, but when you do it correctly, you can solo carry games before the laning phase is even over. In fact, her map pressure is so high that you can even make an argument to move her up to the S tier. The only thing that prevents us from doing that is that she doesn't really have a lot of 1v9 potential later on into the game. She pokes hard, and her combo can delete a squishy target, but she doesn't really have a huge single target DPS for tanks, nor does she have huge AoE damage like any other hyperscaling mages. As with the other 2 roles, Wukong isn't performing quite as well as we thought he would with the new buffs, so we're putting him down to the A tier. He's super good against melee champions, but against mages, he can't really do much to threaten them in lane. You'll usually be able to farm up and be impactful in teamfights, but so is your opponent. Renekton and Zac both get added to the tier list, but landing them in the B tier. Both of them are super niche situational counters, usually to melee assassins that a lot of players seem to struggle with as traditional mid laners. If that sounds like you, maybe you should try them out next time you're against one of those volatile picks. For the first time in a while, Zeri finally moves up from the pits of the tier list, placing him in the B tier. You definitely don't want to blind pick him, but when your opponent picks a low threat mid laner that will allow you to scale, he can be a super strong scaling carry. Graves gets moved down to the C tier. While he does neutralize some opponents with that constant wave shoving and strong trading, he really doesn't do anything past that. He's super susceptible to ganks, and once behind, he's completely useless. Now let's move things down to the bot lane. We really expect to see Samira drop off hard after the nerfs of lifesteal, being as she builds both Shield Bow and Bloodthirster and ran both Bloodline and Ravenous Hunter. But she's actually risen up as one of the best ADCs in the game at the moment. There's a very strong argument to put her in the OP tier, but the only reason that we're a little bit hesitant to do that is because she does need an aggressive support to help her start snowballing in the laning phase, so she belongs in the S tier for now. Yasuo's recent buffs have helped him in the bot lane too, and we're pushing him up to the S tier. Draven gets promoted to the A tier. Like Samira, we thought he'd end up pretty bad since his build is heavily centered around lifesteal, but he's doing great. That being said, he's a little bit too feast or famine to make it to the S tier. Kai'Sa is still a good pick in certain situations, but outside of those times, she's just vastly overshadowed by other hyper carries in the game. She doesn't do nearly as much damage as them, so if you really don't need the safety that she has, she isn't worth it. To finish off, we have our supports. Apparently, assuming that Nami would be better off when they indirectly nerfed every other enchanter was wrong. In fact, she's actually doing a little bit worse than before, and somehow, we're moving her back down to the S tier. Zilean is also doing a little bit worse than he has in the past, so we're moving him down to the A tier for now. The last change that we have in this list is adding Syndra to it. We've featured Syndra several times as an off-meta pick in our 3 mains list, but never really added her here. Since support is her only real viable role at the moment, she definitely needed to be. She lands in the A tier, but honestly, if you're good enough with her, she could be considered S tier due to how well she could potentially bully lane alone. And that wraps things up for our 12.7 mid-patch update. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on where the champions fall in the tier list down in the comments section. Also, feel free to check out the description and join our Discord. Best of luck on Summoner's Rift, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.